Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd find myself here, writing this. But life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it, doesn't it? My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 10 years. She's 34, a pediatric nurse with a laugh that used to light up the room. I'm 36, a software engineer who thought I had everything figured out, career, family, and a wife I adored. We've got 2 kids, Sophie, who's 8 and loves painting, and Max, who's 5 and obsessed with dinosaurs. We met in college. Emily was pre-med back then, all curly hair and boundless energy, and I was your classic introverted nerd. She pulled me out of my shell, and I grounded her when life got overwhelming. She used to call us opposite halves of the same coin. Back then, she'd sneak into my coding lab with late-night coffee and tell me I was her safe place. And I believed her. For most of our marriage, we were happy, or at least I thought we were. We tackled life together, whether it was late-night feedings with the kids or fixing up our little house on weekends. But over the last year, Emily started changing in ways I couldn't pin down. She got restless. She joined a local CrossFit gym with her friend, Tiffany. At first, I was thrilled. She deserved something that was just hers after all those years of being mom, 24/7. But soon, her workouts turned into long evenings with her gym friends. It felt like she was disappearing a little more every week, becoming someone I didn't quite recognize. It was the little things at first. She started wearing perfume to the gym, even though she swore she hated strong scents. Her phone was constantly on Do Not Disturb, and she giggled at texts she wouldn't let me see. Then there were the big things, nights she didn't come home until after midnight, always with some vague excuse about losing track of time. And last month, she bought lingerie, a lacy blue set, unlike anything she's ever owned. When I asked about it, she sighed dramatically, like I'd accused her of murder. "It's for me, Lucas," she said, shaking her head. "I'm allowed to feel good about myself." The way she said it, like I was some controlling jerk for even asking, hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the lingerie. It was the way she'd started looking at me, like I wasn't even there anymore. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just finding herself again. After all, we'd been through a rough patch these last couple of years. She worked long hours at the hospital, I'd been swamped with a big software project, and the kids were, well, kids. Life's messy. I told myself it was just a phase, like the time she got really into yoga and then quit after a month. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Emily I married used to tell me everything, her frustrations, her dreams, even the petty drama with the other nurses. Now, it felt like she was keeping half her life in a locked box I didn't have the key to. And that's where I'm at, Reddit. Sitting in the basement office I built during the pandemic, staring at the computer screen, and wondering if I'm crazy. Am I overthinking all this? Or is my gut right, and there's something, or someone, else? I think the moment everything really clicked for me was last Friday. Emily had texted me around 5 p.m. to say she was going out with Tiffany after their workout. "Just dinner and drinks," she said, adding, "Don't wait up." This wasn't the first time, but something about the way she phrased it felt off. I don't know, maybe it was the way she'd stopped asking if I minded, like it didn't even occur to her that I might care. Sophie and Max kept me distracted most of the evening. We built a blanket fort in the living room and watched Jurassic Park for the millionth time. Around 9:30, I sent Emily a quick text. "Hey, hope you're having fun. What time do you think you'll be home?" No reply. By midnight the kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and I was starting to get that hollow, gnawing feeling in my stomach. I wasn't angry, at least not yet. I was just worried. It wasn't like her to completely ignore me, and my mind started spinning out all these wild possibilities. Was she okay? Did something happen to her? I decided to check her location. We'd shared it with each other for years, not in a controlling way, but as a practical thing, especially with the kids. I opened the app and expected to see her at some trendy downtown spot with Tiffany. Instead, my screen showed her at a small, nondescript apartment complex on the other side of town. My heart sank. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to show me some reasonable explanation. But it didn't. I sat there for an hour, pacing the living room, debating what to do. I told myself there had to be a good reason. Maybe Tiffany had a friend who lived there, or they'd gone to an after-party. I even thought about texting her again, but what would I say? Hey, why are you at some random apartment? At 1:45 a.m., she finally came home. I was sitting on the couch, trying to look casual even though my heart was pounding. She walked in wearing the same gym clothes she'd left in, her hair slightly damp, like she'd showered somewhere. "You're up late," she said, barely glancing at me as she kicked off her sneakers. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep. How was your night?" She shrugged, heading straight for the kitchen. "Fine." Tiffany and I grabbed food, then hung out at her place for a bit. I followed her, my stomach twisting. "That's weird," I said, keeping my tone light. "Your location showed you on the other side of town." Her whole body stiffened for a split second, but she recovered quickly, turning to me with a little laugh. "Oh, yeah? Tiffany's friend Kara lives over there. We stopped by to pick up something she left at her place. Didn't think I needed to give you a play-by-play." She said it so casually, like I was being ridiculous for even asking. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. And then there was that faint trace of cologne again, not mine, not hers, but unmistakably masculine. I didn't push it. I just nodded, said goodnight, and went to bed. But I couldn't sleep. Her explanation didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed, like she'd had it ready just in case. The next day, while she was at work, I sat at my desk and stared at my computer screen, debating whether I should cross a line I'd never crossed before. Eventually, I picked up her tablet. It was synced to her phone, and I couldn't help myself. I opened her messages. What I found. I don't even know how to describe it. There were no texts to Tiffany. Instead, there was a long, ongoing conversation with someone named Brandon. I didn't recognize the name, but the messages left no room for doubt. They weren't talking about fitness or catching up over coffee. "Last night was amazing," one of them read. "I can still smell you on me." There were dozens more. Some explicit, some casual, all of them dripping with a kind of intimacy that made my chest tighten. She'd been lying to me for months. I closed the tablet and sat there in silence, my hands shaking. My mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. Brandon. Gym. Lingerie. Late nights. It all fit, and I hated that it did. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine. When she came home that evening, she kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and asked about my day like nothing had happened. I smiled back. But inside, something had shattered. That night, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The weight of what I'd found was too heavy, and every time I looked at Emily, my chest felt like it was going to cave in. So, after we got the kids to bed, I asked her to sit down in the living room. She looked at me, confused but not alarmed. "What's up?" she asked, settling onto the couch. She tucked her legs under her and reached for her phone out of habit, but I held up a hand. "Emily, I need you to listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her brow furrowed. "Okay. You're freaking me out. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and dove in. "Where were you last night? Really?" Her eyes widened for a split second before she composed herself. "I told you, Lucas. I was with Tiffany, and we stopped by Kara's." "Don't lie to me." I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know you weren't with Tiffany. I checked your messages." The room went completely still. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to think of something to say. Then her expression hardened. "You what?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You went through my messages? Are you serious right now?" "Yes, I am," I said firmly. "And I saw everything, Emily. Everything. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with Brandon." Her face went pale at the mention of his name, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But instead, she rolled her eyes and let out a bitter laugh. Oh, so now you're playing detective? Snooping through my stuff? That's a great look, Lucas. Don't turn this around on me, I shouted, my voice cracking. You've been cheating on me, Emily. Do you even realize what you've done? To me, to us, to our kids? Cheating? She scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. Oh, please. Don't act like you're some saint. You've been emotionally checked out for years. All you care about is work and your stupid video games. God, Lucas, when was the last time you even looked at me like a woman instead of just the mother of your kids? Her words hit me like a slap to the face. So this is my fault now? You think that justifies sneaking around and screwing some guy behind my back? She stood up, her voice dripping with venom. I'm not going to sit here and let you judge me when you know better. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to find it somewhere else. I stood up too, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Don't you dare blame me for this, Emily. I've been here, every step of the way. Through the late nights, the stress, the exhaustion. I've always been here for you. And this? I gestured between us, my voice breaking. This is how you repay me? For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, her chest rising and falling like she was trying to keep herself from screaming. Then, finally, she said, I don't know what you want me to say. I made a mistake, okay? But maybe this marriage isn't working anymore. Maybe it hasn't for a long time. Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. So that's it? I whispered. You're giving up? She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her phone and walked upstairs, leaving me standing there in the middle of the living room, my whole world crumbling around me. After Emily stormed upstairs, I just stood there in the living room, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. My legs felt like jelly, and I collapsed onto the couch, head in my hands. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to let out the tornado of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak tearing through me. But instead I just sat there, frozen. The worst part wasn't even her cheating, it was the coldness in her voice, the way she dismissed everything we'd built like it was some outdated piece of furniture she'd grown tired of. How could she be so indifferent? I kept replaying her words in my head. Maybe this marriage isn't working anymore. I wanted to believe it was just the heat of the moment. That she didn't mean it. But deep down, I knew those words had been sitting on her tongue for a while, waiting for the right time to escape. I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs. I couldn't face her, not after everything she'd said. So I stayed on the couch, staring at the family photos on the wall. One of them, a picture of us from a trip to the Grand Canyon a few years back, caught my eye. We looked so happy in that photo, her head resting on my shoulder, her smile bright and genuine. Was that happiness real? Or had she already started slipping away back then, and I'd been too blind to see it? At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of the kids coming down the stairs. Sophie was the first to spot me. Daddy? Why are you sleeping on the couch? She asked, her little voice filled with curiosity. I forced a smile, even though my heart felt like it had been ripped in half. Just fell asleep watching TV, sweetheart. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and ran off to the kitchen. Max followed her, dragging his stuffed dinosaur behind him. Emily came downstairs a few minutes later, dressed for work, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She didn't say anything, didn't even look at me. She just grabbed her purse and keys and walked out the door like nothing had happened. That was when the tears finally came. I hadn't cried in years, not when my dad passed away, not when work was overwhelming, not even when life felt like it was closing in on me. But sitting there on that couch, I broke. It wasn't just about Emily and Brandon. It was about everything, every moment I'd overlooked, every fight I'd avoided, every way I'd tried to convince myself we were okay when we clearly weren't. I felt like a fool for not seeing the cracks sooner, for believing in a version of us that only existed in my head. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, going through the motions with the kids while my mind spiraled. Was she really done with me? Was there even a way back from this? By the time she came home that evening, I'd made up my mind. If she wanted out, I wasn't going to fight her. But she was going to have to say it. I wasn't going to let her just fade away, leaving me to piece together the wreckage on my own. I needed answers. That evening, I was waiting for her when she walked through the door. The kids were already in bed, their laughter and bedtime stories a distant memory in the quiet house. Emily looked surprised to see me sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes flicking to the untouched cup of coffee in front of me. "What are you doing?" she asked cautiously, setting her purse down on the counter. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. I had spent the whole day rehearsing what I wanted to say, bracing myself for whatever might come next. She sighed, pulling out a chair across from me. "Lucas, I'm exhausted. Can't we do this tomorrow?" "No," I said sharply, surprising even myself. "We're doing this now. I need to know the truth, Emily. The whole truth." Her shoulders stiffened, and for a moment she just stared at me. Then she let out a harsh laugh. "You already made up your mind, didn't you? You've been playing detective, snooping through my phone, and now you're sitting here like a judge and jury. So, what's the point, Lucas? Just say what you want to say." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting to keep my composure. "What I want is for you to be honest with me. No more lies. No more excuses. Just tell me, how long has this been going on with Brandon?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," I snapped, my voice rising despite myself. "It matters because I deserve to know. You owe me that much." Her jaw tightened, and then, finally, she spoke. 6 months, she said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around, of living a double life while I was here, holding everything together. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to us?" She looked up at me then, her eyes brimming with tears. But there was something else there, too. Something cold, almost defiant. "I don't know, Lucas. Maybe because I was tired of feeling invisible. Maybe because Brandon made me feel wanted in a way you haven't in years." The words stung, but I couldn't let her turn this into a blame game. "Don't you dare put this on me," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I've been here, Emily. I've been doing everything I can to support you, to take care of the kids, to make this life work. And while I was doing that, you were—" "Stop it!" she shouted, slamming her hands on the table. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I wanted this? Gah, Lucas, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. But it did. And now, I don't know how to fix it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, the anger between us dissolved into something raw and painful. "I loved you, Emily," I said softly, my throat tightening. "I still do. But I can't keep fighting for us if you've already given up." She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at her hands, her silence saying more than words ever could. For a while, we just sat there, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to say, but none of them felt like they'd make a difference. "Do you even want to save this?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. Emily looked up at me, her eyes glassy with tears she hadn't let fall. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't know if we can." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "You don't know?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "How can you not know, Emily? This is our life. Our family. How can you just sit there and act like it's all disposable?" "I'm not saying it's disposable," she shot back, her voice rising. "I'm saying I'm lost, Lucas. I've been lost for a long time, and you didn't even notice." "I didn't notice?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface again. "Do you think I don't feel lost too? We have 2 kids, jobs that drain us, and a marriage that's been hanging by a thread for months. But I didn't run to someone else to make me feel better. Her face crumpled at that, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally broken through to her. But then she straightened up, her jaw tightening. You think I wanted this? She said, her voice trembling. You think I woke up one day and said, hey, I think I'll ruin my marriage today? It wasn't like that, Lucas. Then what was it like? I demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made a series of choices that destroyed everything we built together. She let out a shaky breath, pressing her palms to her forehead like she was trying to hold herself together. It wasn't about you, she said quietly. It was about me. About feeling alive again. I stared at her, the words settling over me like a weight I couldn't shake. Feeling alive, I repeated bitterly. And what about me, Emily? What about the nights I stayed up late worrying about you? The mornings I got the kids ready for school so you could sleep in after your gym nights? Did that make you feel alive too? She didn't answer. I stood up then, unable to sit there any longer. I can't do this, I said, shaking my head. Not if you're not willing to fight for us. Not if you're not even sorry. Her head shot up at that. I am sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry I hurt you, Lucas. I'm sorry for all of it. But I can't go back and undo what I did. And I don't know how to make you trust me again. I stared at her, searching her face for something, anything, that might convince me there was still hope. But all I saw was exhaustion and guilt. I don't think you can, I said finally, my voice hollow. I don't think either of us can. Her tears finally spilled over then, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, my chest heaving. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body. This was it, wasn't it? The moment everything fell apart. I thought about Sophie and Max, sleeping soundly in their beds, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. I thought about what this would mean for them, for our family. And I thought about Emily, the woman I'd loved for over a decade, who now felt like a stranger. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. All I could do was lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and wonder where it all went wrong. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Emily had left early, probably to avoid another confrontation, and the kids were still asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I had to make a decision. For a while, I just sat there, weighing my options. The idea of staying and trying to fix things felt impossible. How do you rebuild trust when it's been shattered so completely? But the thought of leaving, of breaking up our family, was like a knife to the chest. By the time Emily came home that evening, I'd made up my mind. She walked in, her face pale and drawn, like she hadn't slept either. She set her bag down on the counter and looked at me. Can we talk? She asked, her voice tentative. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated for a moment before taking the chair across from me, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I've been thinking, I started, my voice steady but firm. About everything. About us. Her eyes darted to mine, searching for some clue as to where this was going. I don't think this is something we can fix, I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. Not after what you've done. Not after all the lies. She flinched, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. Lucas, I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But You don't have to say it again, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I've heard all the apologies. I've heard the excuses. But the truth is, I don't think you want to save this marriage as much as you want to save face. And I'm done being the only one fighting for us. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, my voice cracking slightly on the word. We'll figure out a custody arrangement for the kids, and we'll try to keep things as civil as possible. But I can't keep pretending that this can be fixed. She stared at me, her tears spilling over now. Lucas, please, she whispered. We can go to counseling. We can try. For the kids. For us. For the kids? I repeated, my voice rising. Don't you dare use them as a reason to stay. They deserve better than a mother who sneaks around and a father who can't even look at her without seeing the betrayal written all over her face. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. And for a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered Brandon. I remembered the texts. I remembered the months of lies and the nights I spent alone, wondering where she was and what I'd done wrong. And I knew there was no going back. I stood up, my legs shaky but resolute. I'll start looking for a place tomorrow, I said, my voice quieter now. You can stay here with the kids until we figure things out. Lucas, wait, she cried, reaching for me. But I stepped back, out of her reach. I'm done waiting, Emily, I said softly. I'm done. And with that I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, but I tried to keep moving forward. Therapy helped a little, but the weight of everything I had lost still sat heavy on my chest. The kids adjusted as best as they could. Sophie was more clingy during our weekends together, and Max, though quieter, asked questions that sliced through me like knives. Daddy, why can't you and Mommy live together anymore? I hated lying, but the truth wasn't something a 5-year-old should carry. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, buddy, I said softly, ruffling his hair. But we both love you and Sophie so much. That'll never change. He seemed satisfied with that, but I wasn't. Every time I dropped them off at the house, my house, Emily was there, playing the perfect mother. It churned my stomach, knowing she was the reason all this was happening. Things took a turn one Friday night. I had just dropped the kids off and was walking back to my car when a man stepped out of the house. Brandon. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some buff gym rat or smooth-talking pleba. He was average, shorter than me, a little pudgy, with a cocky smirk that made my blood boil. He didn't belong there, in the house where my kids lived, the house I'd spent years building a life in. Lucas, right? He said, leaning casually against the doorframe like he owned the place. I froze. My fist clenched instinctively, and it took everything in me not to lunge at him. What the hell are you doing here? I asked, my voice low and sharp. He shrugged, completely unfazed. Emily invited me over. Said it'd be good for the kids to see us getting along. My vision blurred with rage. The kids? Are you out of your mind? You think you have any right to be around my kids? His smirk widened, and he crossed his arms. Look, man, I get it. This is hard for you. But Emily's moved on, and maybe it's time you do too. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was in his face, my hands gripping the front of his shirt. You don't get to talk to me about moving on, I snarled. You destroyed my family. Before things could escalate further, Emily appeared at the door. Lucas, stop, she shouted, her face pale. What are you doing? What am I doing? I shot back, releasing Brandon and turning on her. What the hell is he doing here? Around our kids? She glanced nervously at Brandon, then back at me. It's not what you think. He was just what? I snapped. Just replacing me? You think I'm going to stand by while this piece of garbage plays house with my children? Brandon stepped forward, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Hey man, I'm not trying to take your place. I'm just here for Emily. That did it. I swung before I could stop myself, my fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, clutching his face, while Emily screamed. Lucas, stop it! She cried, stepping between us. But I was done. You brought him into their lives, Emily. You brought this into our lives. I hope you're proud of yourself. I turned and stormed off, ignoring the throbbing in my hand and the way Emily called after me. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through me like fire. Later that night I got a text from her. Emily, we need to talk. Not about us, about the kids. This can't happen again. I ignored it. But the next day, I got another text, this one from an unknown number. Unknown, keep your temper in check, or this ends badly for you. I didn't need to guess who it was. The days that followed were tense. I debated whether to file a restraining order, but I knew that would only make things messier. Instead, I started documenting everything, every interaction, every conversation. If Brandon thought he could intimidate me, he had another thing coming. The breaking point came a week later. I was picking the kids up when Sophie ran out to the car, her face pale. "Daddy," she whispered, clutching my arm. "Mommy and that man were fighting. He was yelling at her, really loud." My blood ran cold. I got out of the car, leaving Sophie and Max inside, and marched up to the door. "Emily!" I shouted, pounding on the door. She opened it a moment later, her face red and tear-streaked. "Lucas, not now," she said, her voice trembling. "Where is he?" I demanded, pushing past her. "Lucas, stop," she begged, grabbing my arm. "It's not what you think." But I'd already seen him. Brandon was in the kitchen, holding an ice pack to his face, a dark bruise blooming on his cheek. He glared at me, but this time there was no smirk. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And don't ever come back." He hesitated, looking to Emily for support, but she didn't say a word. After a long, tense moment, he grabbed his jacket and left, slamming the door behind him. Emily sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "This is a mess," she whispered. "Everything's a mess." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked back to the car, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and something else I couldn't quite name. I was shaking by the time I got back to the car. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Sophie and Max sat in the back seat, wide-eyed and silent, sensing the storm brewing inside me. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" Max asked hesitantly, clutching his dinosaur. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror and forced a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Everything's fine, buddy. Let's go grab some ice cream, okay?" I needed time to think, time to calm the fury boiling in my chest. We drove to the little shop on Main Street, the ones Sophie loved because they gave extra sprinkles for free. While they sat at the table, happily devouring their cones, I stepped outside to make a call. "Hey, Dan," I said when my brother picked up. "I need a favor." Dan was the kind of guy who knew people, the kind of people who could find things out without leaving a paper trail. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me the details." And I told him everything. About Brandon. About Emily. About the text message I'd gotten. "I don't want anything illegal," I added, though my voice lacked conviction. "I just need to know who I'm dealing with." Dan chuckled. "Relax, Lucas. I've got you." When I got back inside, Sophie and Max were giggling about something. For a moment, it hit me how much they'd been through, how much we'd been through. I promised myself I'd protect them, no matter what. The storm hit that evening. It started with a call from Emily. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "What?" I said sharply, skipping the pleasantries. "Lucas," she said, her voice low and frantic. "He's back." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Brandon," she whispered. "He's outside. He's drunk, and he's yelling. I don't know what to do." My blood turned to ice. "Call the cops," I said immediately. "I can't," she hissed. "What if the kids wake up? What if—" "Emily," I cut her off. "Do it. Now. I'm on my way." I hung up and was out the door in seconds, the kids left in my neighbor's care. By the time I pulled up to the house, I could hear Brandon shouting from the sidewalk. "You think you can just throw me out?" he slurred, pacing in front of the house. "You think I'm nobody? You'll come crawling back, Emily. They always do." I stepped out of the car, my chest heaving with fury. "Hey!" I bellowed, striding toward him. Brandon turned, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Oh, look who it is," he sneered. "The ex-husband coming to play hero. How predictable." "Get the hell out of here," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He staggered toward me, his breath reeking of alcohol. "What are you gonna do, huh? Hit me again? Go ahead, big man. Show your kids what a real tough guy looks like." It was everything I could do not to deck him right then and there. Instead, I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Leave now, or I swear to God you'll regret it." He laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Yeah? You and what army?" Before I could respond, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Brandon's face twisted with panic, and he stumbled backward. Emily must have called after all. "Looks like my army's here," I said coldly. The cops pulled up, lights flashing, and 2 officers stepped out. Brandon tried to argue, slurring something about his rights, but they weren't having it. They cuffed him and hauled him into the cruiser while Emily stood on the porch, clutching her arms around herself. When it was over, I walked up to her. She looked at me, her face pale and drawn, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "This is what you brought into our lives," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Into their lives. I didn't know it would get this bad," she whispered. "That's the problem, Emily," I said. "You never think things through. And now we're all paying the price." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there as the police car disappeared down the street. The cops taking Brandon away should have been the end of it. But chaos has a way of lingering, like smoke after a fire, and this fire wasn't done burning. The next day, I woke up to a pounding on my door. My first thought was that it was the landlord, maybe I'd parked in the wrong spot again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't my landlord. It was Emily. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and she was holding her phone out to me like it was a loaded weapon. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. I took the phone reluctantly, already bracing for whatever fresh hell this was. It was a video, shaky and dark, but clear enough to make my stomach drop. It showed me, standing in her front yard last night, shouting at Brandon. My voice was low but unmistakably angry, my posture threatening. And then, as the video continued, it showed Brandon staggering backward, clutching his face like I'd hit him. The problem was I hadn't. The timestamp on the video was wrong too. It claimed the incident happened hours before the cops arrived. "What is this?" I demanded, handing the phone back. "I don't know," Emily said, her voice rising. "But it's everywhere. My friends are texting me, asking what's going on. Someone posted it to Facebook, and now people are saying you attacked him. Who filmed this?" I snapped, my heart racing. "Brandon," she whispered. "I think he staged it." Of course he did. The smarmy bastard had been drunk, but not too drunk to plan this. I could feel my blood boiling all over again. "You realize what this means, right?" I said, pacing the tiny living room. "He's trying to make me look like the aggressor. If he presses charges." "I know," Emily cut in, her voice trembling. "But we have to stop him." "We?" I laughed bitterly, turning to face her. "You think this is a we problem? You brought him into our lives, Emily. You're the reason any of this is happening." She flinched, tears welling in her eyes, but I didn't care. "I'll handle it," I said through gritted teeth, grabbing my jacket. "But you better hope he backs off, or things are going to get worse." I drove straight to Dan's place, my head spinning with rage and panic. When I showed him the video, he whistled low, shaking his head. "This guy's good. Slimy as hell, but good. Can you fix it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Dan smirked. "You're lucky I know a guy who can dig into this. Let's see where this video really came from." While Dan got to work, I spent the next few days on edge. The video kept spreading, and Brandon was leaning into the narrative hard. He wasn't pressing charges yet, but he made a cryptic post online about standing up to bullies, which only fueled the fire. Then, 2 nights later, I got a call from Dan. "You sitting down?" he asked. "What now?" I groaned. "I traced the video back to Brandon's account," he said. "But here's the kicker, it's not the only one. He's got a whole collection of stuff he's been sending around. Photos of Emily, texts she sent him, even a video of them, you know. My stomach turned. What the hell is he doing? Looks like he's trying to burn your life down, Dan said. And hers too, if she doesn't play along. I hung up without saying goodbye, my mind racing. Brandon wasn't just trying to screw with me, he was playing a game of total destruction. And Emily, whether I liked it or not, was caught in the crossfire. That night I called Emily. She picked up on the first ring, her voice wary. Lucas? I talked to Dan, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Brandon's got more dirt on you. Stuff he's been spreading around. She let out a shaky breath. What do we do? We? I laughed bitterly. You deal with your mess, Emily. But I'm going to make sure he never comes near me or the kids again. How? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. I have a few ideas, I said darkly. And they don't involve waiting for the cops to save the day. Lucas, don't do anything stupid, she pleaded. But I was done listening. I wasn't stupid enough to show up at Brandon's place swinging, but I wasn't going to let him get away with this either. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd give him a taste of his own medicine. Dan sent me the address Brandon had been using for his staged online antics, a rundown apartment complex on the other side of town. I drove there late the next evening, parking a few blocks away and walking the rest of the way to keep things low-key. The place reeked of stale beer and desperation, the kind of spot where people disappeared for a reason. As I approached his door, my mind was buzzing with questions I didn't yet have answers to. What was Brandon's endgame? And why did he keep coming after me, even after Emily was clearly on the fence about him? I knocked once hard. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open, and there he was. Brandon looked worse than I'd imagined, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, and reeking of booze. He leaned against the doorframe, his smirk returning when he saw me. Well, well, he drawled. Look who came to visit. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Talk? Sure, come on in, he slurred, stepping aside with a mocking wave of his arm. The inside of his apartment was a disaster. Empty beer bottles littered the floor, and the furniture looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. But what caught my eye was the stack of papers on the coffee table, printouts of messages, pictures, and what looked like screenshots of his conversations with Emily. You've been busy, I said, gesturing to the mess. He shrugged, dropping onto the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. You gotta be prepared in this line of work. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. Cut the crap, Brandon. What do you want? He grinned, his teeth yellowed from what I could only assume was a combination of cheap whiskey and bad decisions. What do I want? Isn't it obvious? I want what's fair. Emily left me high and dry after all the time I spent on her. Do you have any idea what it's like to put effort into someone and have them just toss you aside? I felt a flicker of satisfaction hearing him admit Emily had dumped him, but I didn't let it show. So your plan is to ruin her life? Drag my kids into it? You think that's going to fix anything? He shrugged again, his grin widening. Life's messy, Lucas. Maybe it's time you learn that. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew it, I'd grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet. Listen to me, I hissed, my face inches from his. You stay the hell away from my family. You keep your name out of our mouths, your face off our screens, and your garbage far away from my kids. Do you understand me? For a moment, his smirk faltered, but then it returned, smug and unshaken. Or what? You gonna hit me again? Go ahead. Let's see how that works out for you. I let go of him, shoving him back onto the couch. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I knew I couldn't let him bait me. Not here. Not now. Instead, I turned and grabbed the stack of papers from the coffee table. Hey! He shouted, scrambling to his feet. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the kitchen, shoved the papers into the sink, and lit a match. What the hell are you doing? He yelled, stumbling after me as flames licked at the edges of the papers. Taking away your leverage, I said flatly, watching the fire consume his collection of lies and blackmail. Brandon lunged at me, his movements clumsy and drunken, but I sidestepped him easily. He crashed into the counter, knocking over a stack of empty beer bottles that shattered on the floor. "You're insane!" he shouted, his face twisted with rage. "No, Brandon," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm just done letting you control this." I left him there, cursing and stumbling through the wreckage of his own making. As I walked out into the night, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Brandon didn't just slink away quietly. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, the fallout began. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of text messages and missed calls. The first was from Emily. "Emily, what the hell did you do? Brandon's blowing up my phone, threatening to go to the cops. Call me." I ignored it. The next messages were from Dan. "Dan, hey, just saw some new posts. Brandon's spinning this hard. Said you broke into his place and assaulted him. Looks like he got some backup. Call me when you can." Backup? My stomach sank as I scrolled through screenshots Dan had sent me. Brandon wasn't just spreading rumors, he was building a full-blown narrative. One post read, "Some people think they're untouchable, that they can just walk into your life and ruin it. Last night, I was the victim of a violent break-in. I'm not scared, though. I'll stand my ground. Justice will be served." Attached was a picture of his trashed kitchen, complete with the burnt remnants of the papers in the sink. The caption underneath read, "The lengths some people will go to hide the truth." My phone buzzed again, Dan calling. "Lucas, we've got a problem," he said as soon as I picked up. "No kidding," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "It's bigger than you think," he continued. "Brandon's got a friend claiming they were there last night, that they witnessed you assault him. It's total BS, but it's gaining traction. If this keeps up, you could be looking at actual charges." I swore under my breath. "And what about the part where he's been harassing me and Emily? Spreading lies? Is anyone looking at that?" "Not yet," Dan said. "But I've got some leads. Sit tight." Sit tight? That was easier said than done. By the time I picked up the kids that afternoon, the tension was unbearable. Emily was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed and her face set in a hard line. "We need to talk," she said as I walked up. "Not in front of them." I shot back, nodding towards Sophie and Max. Her eyes narrowed, but she held her tongue until the kids were buckled in the car. Then she followed me to the driver's side window. "What the hell is going on, Lucas?" she hissed. "Brandon's saying you broke into his apartment. That you attacked him. And now people are asking me if I knew about it." "Good," I said flatly. "Maybe it'll give them a taste of what you've put me through." Her jaw dropped. "This isn't just about you," she snapped. "It's about our kids, our lives. Do you even care what happens to them if this blows up? Do you?" I shot back, glaring at her. "Because none of this would be happening if you hadn't dragged him into our lives in the first place." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes blazing with anger and guilt. Then she stepped back, throwing up her hands. "Fine," she said. "You want to play the hero? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." I didn't answer. I just drove off, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. That night, Dan called again. "I've got something," he said. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Brandon's friend, the one claiming they witnessed the break-in? Turns out they've got a history. Multiple arrests, mostly for fraud and harassment. And get this, they're not even in the same state right now. I've got proof they were 200 miles away last night." A spark of hope flared in my chest. "So we can expose him?" "Not yet," Dan said, his tone cautious. "We need more. I'm working on it." "Work faster," I said. The next day, things took an even darker turn. When I got back to the apartment after dropping the kids off at school, There was a note taped to my door. You think you're smart? Keep pushing, and you'll regret it. No name. No signature. Just a single, chilling message. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, and checked the windows. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My phone buzzed. Another text from Emily. Emily, Brandon just sent me something. You need to see it. A minute later, another text came through, this time with an attachment. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was a photo of me with the kids, taken earlier that morning while I was walking them to school. In the background, half hidden behind a tree, was a shadowy figure holding a phone. Brandon was watching us. The photo of me and the kids was burned into my mind. That smug, shadowy figure in the background, it wasn't just Brandon being a creep anymore. He was escalating, and now Sophie and Max were part of the game. I called Emily immediately. She picked up on the first ring. Tell me everything, I demanded. He sent it this morning, she said, her voice shaky. Just that picture and a message. This is just the beginning. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. Emily, listen to me. If he's threatening you or the kids, you need to call the police. She let out a bitter laugh. The police? You mean the same ones who'll believe his fake break-in story? What am I supposed to tell them? That my unstable ex is playing paparazzi? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. She was right. Brandon was crafty, and he'd played his hand well. He had just enough plausible deniability to make himself look like the victim while he chipped away at our lives. Then we fight fire with fire, I said, a steely edge in my voice. What are you talking about? Emily asked warily. I'm going to end this, I said. Tonight. Lucas, don't do anything stupid, she pleaded. But it was too late. I was already grabbing my keys. I didn't go in blind. Dan had given me a heads up on where Brandon might be tonight, a bar on the outskirts of town, his usual haunt when he wasn't hiding in his dingy apartment. When I walked in, the place reeked of stale beer and cheap cologne. It didn't take long to spot him. He was at a booth in the back, nursing a whiskey, his phone propped up against a salt shaker. A faint smirk played on his lips as he scrolled, probably basking in the chaos he'd created. I walked straight up to him. Hey, Brandon, I said, my voice low and calm. He looked up, startled, but quickly recovered. Lucas, he drawled, leaning back in his seat. Didn't expect to see you here. Come to apologize? I ignored the jab and leaned in closer, my hands resting on the edge of the table. You're going to stop. The photos, the videos, the threats, you're done. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Or what? You gonna light my kitchen on fire again? I'm not here to threaten you, I said, my voice steady. I'm here to give you a choice. You can either walk away now, delete everything, disappear, or we take this all the way. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. And what exactly does all the way mean, Lucas? I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, hitting play on a recording Dan had sent me earlier. Brandon, you don't have to do this, a voice said, slurred but unmistakably his. It was from a call he'd made to his so-called witness, coaching them on what to say about the break-in. Just tell them you saw him hit me. It'll hold up. Trust me. His smirk faltered. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice tight. Let's just say I have friends, I said. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I know about the fake witness. I know about your other scams. And if you don't back off, I'll make sure everyone else knows too. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. You're bluffing, he said, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Try me, I said, standing up. But remember, Brandon, when this is over, I'll still have my kids. What will you have? I turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, his cocky facade crumbling. I didn't sleep that night. I kept expecting some kind of retaliation, a knock at the door, a text, something. But nothing came. The next morning Dan called. Brandon pulled everything down, he said, his voice triumphant. The posts, the videos, even his account. It's like he vanished. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with suspicion. You think he's really gone? I asked. For now, Dan said. But guys like him don't stay quiet for long. Keep your guard up. I thanked him and hung up, but the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't go away. Later that afternoon, Emily called. Is it over? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For now, I said. But I'm not letting my guard down. She was silent for a moment, then said, Thank you, Lucas. For protecting the kids. I didn't respond. It wasn't just the kids I was protecting. It was everything Brandon had tried to destroy. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Brandon had gone radio silent, and while Dan assured me that we'd likely scared him off for good, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. People like Brandon didn't just vanish. They regrouped. On Wednesday night, my phone buzzed with a notification that sent my stomach into freefall. It was an email. No subject line, just a single attachment. I opened it, and there it was, a video of me at Brandon's apartment that night. This wasn't a random angle either, it was from a camera he must have hidden somewhere inside. The footage showed me storming into the kitchen, grabbing his stack of papers, and lighting them on fire. The accompanying text read, You think you're smart? This is just the start. Pay up or I share this with the cops, $10,000 by Friday. The bastard was blackmailing me. I sat there, staring at the email, my mind racing. Brandon had upped the ante. He wasn't just targeting me anymore, this was a full-blown extortion attempt. I called Dan immediately. This guy doesn't quit, I said, pacing the apartment. Dan let out a low whistle. He's playing a dangerous game. Extortion's a whole new level. You've got him now, Lucas. Yeah, but if I go to the cops, he's got the video, I said, rubbing my temples. They'll believe him before they believe me. Especially after that fake witness crap. Then we need to turn the tables, Dan said. How? By giving him what he wants, sort of. The next day, I told Emily what was happening. Her reaction was a mix of guilt and panic, but to her credit, she didn't try to deflect. What do you need me to do? She asked. Stay out of it, I said. I'm handling this. It wasn't just about pride. I didn't want her anywhere near Brandon again. Dan and I set up a plan. I'd meet Brandon in a public place with a payment, but instead of cash, the envelope would contain a flash drive. On it was a doctored version of the video, one that conveniently cut out the incriminating parts and left Brandon looking unhinged. Think of it as bait, Dan had said with a grin. He won't know what hit him. Friday night came quickly. We chose a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with dim lighting and greasy burgers that no one would look twice at. I spotted Brandon in a booth near the back, sipping on a beer like he didn't have a care in the world. You came, he said, smirking as I slid into the booth across from him. You made it clear I didn't have much of a choice, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. He picked it up, his smirk widening. Good boy. I forced myself to stay calm as he opened it and pulled out the flash drive. What's this? He asked, his smirk faltering. Insurance, I said evenly. Before you get any ideas about screwing me over, I thought you might want to see what happens if I share this little gem with the right people. His face darkened as he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. I watched as he clicked on the video file, his smirk fading completely as the altered footage played out. You son of a... he started, but I cut him off. Let me be clear, I said, leaning in. This ends now. You delete everything, every file, every post, every trace of this mess. And then you disappear. If you don't, this video goes public. And believe me, I've got more where that came from. Brandon's jaw tightened, his eyes darting around the diner like he was looking for an escape route. For the first time, he looked genuinely cornered. You think this makes us even? He hissed. No, I said, my voice low and cold. It makes me the one holding the cards. Now make your move, Brandon. But choose wisely. When I left the diner, my hands were still shaking, but I felt a strange sense of calm. Dan was waiting in his car a few blocks away, and I gave him a nod as I walked by. You think he'll back off? He asked when I got in. He doesn't have a choice, I said. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Brandon might be down, but he wasn't out. And I wasn't going to let my guard down, not for a second. I didn't sleep much after the meeting at the diner. Even though Brandon had taken the bait, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had something else up his sleeve. Men like him didn't just roll over and quit. But I was done reacting. It was time to take full control. The first step was going to the police. I called Dan the next morning. We're taking this to the cops, I said firmly. It's time to end this once and for all. Are you sure? Dan asked, a note of caution in his voice. Brandon's good at spinning stories. You've seen how he plays the victim. That's why we're going in prepared, I said. You still have the records of his fake witness and those shady emails? Every last one, Dan replied. Good. Let's bury him in his own lies. I met with the police later that day. Emily came with me, her face pale but resolute. As much as I wanted to keep her out of this, she insisted on being there. For the kids, she said. We sat down with Detective Harris, a sharp-eyed woman who didn't seem the type to tolerate nonsense. I laid everything out, the blackmail attempt, the fake witness, the doctored video, and the threats. Dan had even managed to recover older records of Brandon's scams from other states, showing a clear pattern of manipulation and extortion. Detective Harris listened intently, jotting down notes, and occasionally asking pointed questions. When I showed her the emails and recordings Dan had dug up, her expression hardened. This is solid, she said, closing the folder. We'll bring him in for questioning. If he so much as breathes wrong, we'll nail him for extortion and harassment. Will it be enough? Emily asked, her voice wavering. It's a start, the detective said. And with this much evidence, it's a damn good one. Brandon was arrested 2 days later. The news hit social media almost immediately, and the narrative shifted faster than I thought possible. Suddenly, the man who had painted himself as a victim was exposed for what he really was, a manipulative predator. Emily and I received an outpouring of support from friends, family, and even strangers online. It was surreal, watching the tide turn after weeks of feeling like the whole world was against us. But the real victory came when Detective Harris called me a week later. We've got him, she said. He folded during questioning and admitted to the blackmail attempt. He also confessed to fabricating the break-in story and coaching his so-called witness. He's looking at multiple charges. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a genuine laugh. Thank you, Detective, I said. Just doing my job, she replied. But if I were you, I'd get a restraining order. Guys like him don't take rejection well. The aftermath wasn't easy. Even with Brandon out of the picture, the damage he'd done lingered. Emily and I had a long conversation about where we stood, and it was clear that while we could co-parent, our marriage was beyond repair. I'm sorry, she said one night after the kids were asleep. For everything. For him. For what I let happen to us. I know, I said quietly. But sorry doesn't fix this, Emily. We've hurt each other too much. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just want to do right by the kids, she whispered. Then we'll focus on that, I said. One step at a time. Over the next few months, life began to settle. I threw myself into work and therapy, finally allowing myself to process everything that had happened. I focused on the kids, making sure they felt loved and secure despite the chaos they'd been through. Emily moved out of the house and into a smaller place closer to her parents. We kept things civil for Sophie and Max, working together to maintain some sense of normalcy for them. As for Brandon, he pled guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to several years in prison. The judge issued a no-contact order, ensuring he wouldn't be able to worm his way back into our lives anytime soon. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Emily's, I found myself standing outside the house, staring up at the windows where the light from Sophie's room spilled out into the night. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. And for now, that was enough. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes, you can't save everything. But you can rebuild. You can protect what matters most and find strength in starting over. To anyone going through something similar, trust your instincts, stand your ground, and never let anyone take away your sense of worth. You're stronger than you think.